I'm Eowyn Ivy, and my book is The Snow Child. It's such an honor to be here with all these guys up here. What a great group of authors. My book is based on a Russian fairy tale about an old man and a woman who build a little girl out of snow and she comes to life. But it's set in 1920s Alaska and very grounded in reality. Jack and Mabel are my main characters. They've moved to Alaska at kind of a last-ditch effort at happiness, and they're really struggling. And the first thing I'm going to read two short scenes. The first one, Jack is trying to hunt for a moose, and he's not much of a hunter, and it's kind of a key to their getting through the winter of having enough food. It was the quiet that pulled him out of his gloom, a quiet full of presence. Jack brought his head up. It was the child. She was before him, just a few yards away. She stood atop the snow, arms at her sides, the hint of a smile at her pale lips. White fur trimmed her coat and leather boots. Her face was framed by the velvety brown of a sable hat, and she wore Mabel's red scarf and mittens. The child was dusted in crystals of ice, as if she had just walked through a snowstorm or spent a brilliantly cold night outdoors. Jack would have spoken to her, but for her eyes. The broken blue of river ice, glacial crevasses, moonlight, they held him. She blinked, her blonde lashes glittering with frost, and darted away. "Wait," he called out. He stumbled after her. "Wait, don't be afraid." He was clumsy, tripping over his own boots and kicking up snow. She sprinted ahead, but stopped often to look back at him. "Please," he called again, "wait." A sound came to Jack's ears, like wind stirring dried leaves, or snow blowing across ice, or maybe a whisper from far away. "Shh." He did not call out again. He ducked beneath tree branches and waded through the snow as the girl led him farther and farther into the forest. He had to watch his feet to keep from tripping, but each time he looked up, she was waiting. And then she wasn't. He stopped, squinted, and scanned the snow for tracks. He saw no sign. Once again, he became aware of the quiet, the strange calm of the forest. From behind him came a high, chirpy whistle, like a chickadee's call, and he turned, expecting to see a bird, or maybe the child. Instead, a bull moose stood not 50 yards away. It raised its head slowly, as if the massive, many-pointed antlers were a ponderous burden. Snow sprinkled its long nose and brown hackles. It swayed its antlers slowly, side to side. Never had Jack seen such a magnificent animal. On lanky legs, it must have stood more than 7 feet at the withers, and its neck was as stout as a tree trunk. In his wonder, Jack nearly overlooked the obvious. This was his quarry. And the next I'm going to read is Mabel's sister Ada is still back in Pennsylvania in their family home. And so Mabel and Ada have been sharing letters back and forth as Mabel adjusts to this new life in Alaska. So this is a letter from Ada to Mabel. Dear Mabel, your letters and sketches have become quite an attraction at our home. Whenever one arrives, we host a dinner party and invite many of our closest friends and relatives. With your permission, I have read the letters aloud, and your sketches have been passed from one hand to the next, along with exclamations of, "Remarkable! Such beauty!" More than once, I've been told that you are the frontier equivalent of an Italian master studying human anatomy. Your sketches of the sable's snarling teeth and clawed feet were among the favorites this last night, as were your studies of the alder cones and winter-killed grasses. Your letters, too, catch glimpses of this wild place that has become your home. You always did have a talent for expressing yourself, and perhaps no other time in your life have you had such wondrous sights to express. Our only wish is that you would write more often. I do believe I will hold on to everything you send, and someday you should publish a book of your drawings and observations. There is something fanciful, yet feral about them. Along with your interest in this tale of the Snow Maiden, I am reminded of the time you spent as a child chasing fairies in the woods near our home. As I recall, dear Mabel, you slept more than one night in those great oak trees, and when Mother found you the next morning, you would swear you had seen fairies that flew like butterflies and lit up the night like lightning bugs. I remember now with some shame that the rest of you teased you about seeing such spirits. But now that my own grandchildren chase similar fancies, I do not discourage them. In my old age, I see that life itself is often more fantastic and terrible than the stories we believed as children, and that perhaps there is no harm in finding magic among the trees. Your loving sister, Ada. Thank you.
passage from my book, The Yellow Birds. All you really need to know is that the narrator, John, has come home from Iraq. The transition is going less than well, and in this passage he's leaving his mother's house for the last time, and he's thinking about a friend who didn't make it home. I sat down there a while until the sun was straight above me, and the light fell down in wide columns and sweat ran down between my shoulder blades. I decided then to walk the tracks toward the city. It wasn't so much a decision as it was a product of trying to turn off my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about Murph. I drifted and followed the guidance of the tops of my boots, and I tried not to think, and when I got back up to the porch, I wiped the sweat from my forehead, opened the sliding door, put a few things in the duffel bag, and left. I hadn't known what I was doing then, but my memories of Murph were a kind of misguided archaeology. Sifting through the remains of what I remembered about him was a denial of the fact that a hole was really all that was left. An absence I had attempted to reverse but found that I could not. There was simply not enough material to account for what had been removed. The closer I got to reconstructing him in my mind, the more the picture I was trying to recreate receded. For every memory I was able to pull up, another seemed to fall away forever. There was some proportion about it all, though. It was like putting a puzzle together from behind, the shape familiar, the picture quickly fading, the muted tan of the cardboard backing a tease at wholeness and completion. I think of a time when we sat in the evening in the guard tower, watching the war go by in streaks of red and green and other briefer lights, and he'd tell me of an afternoon in the little hillside apple orchard that his mother worked, the turn and flash of a paring knife along a wrap of gauze as they grafted uppers to rootstocks and new branches to blossom, or the time he saw but could not explain his awe when his father brought a dozen caged canaries home from the mine and let them loose in the hollow where they lived. How the canaries only flitted and sang a while before perching back atop their cages, which had been arranged in rows, his father likely thinking that the birds would not return by choice to their captivity, and that the cages should be used for something else, a pretty bed for vegetables, perhaps a place to string up candles between the trees. And in what strange silences the world worked, Murph must have wondered, as the birds settled peaceably in their formation and ceased to sing. And I'd try to recall things until nothing came, which I quickly found was my only certainty, until what was left of him was a sketch in shadow, a skeleton falling apart, and my friend Murph was no more friend to me than the strangest stranger. My missing him became a grave that could not be filled or leveled, just a blemish in a field, and a damn poor substitute for grief, as graves so often are. I'm really honored to be here with you all, so thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Maggie Shipstead, and I do not like my fellow finalists. That is a lie, they're all lovely, which is really beating the odds when you have a group of 7 writers. So. My book is called Seating Arrangements, and it takes place over a couple days on a fictional island called Waskeke. I'm going to read from the middle of the book. This is actually the only section that's in this character's point of view. Her name is Otzi, and she's the groom's grandmother. The groom's name is Grayson, and the bride's family, their name is Van Meter, and it's at their house. Otzi was drinking her vodka neat because she did not care for the way Maud made Bloody Marys, and the Van Meters didn't have any clam juice with which she might have been able to doctor one to her satisfaction. Lately, her drink of choice was a bullshot. Her friend Doris had put her onto the concoction, vodka mixed with cold beef bouillon, and she took it as a sort of curative tonic, even though her grandsons laughed. Cold beef vodka soup, they called it. She watched Sterling sitting with that Van Meter girl on the arm of his chair. He looked like he could use some nutrition mixed with his booze. He had gotten fat, but also sallow. The girl didn't appear to mind. A wedding was always an aphrodisiac, full of temporary pairings driven by vicarious hope. Love was in the air, weak and snappy as static electricity. Let them do as they liked. She had met Harold at a wedding, and their marriage had been tolerable enough. She sipped and watched the boys and the Egyptian girl running on the grass. Frances swatted listlessly at the birdie, missing it. Waskeke made Otzi uncomfortable. She disliked the expectation that she should always be looking at the water, the sky, and so on. The sun had fallen into the trees, leaving behind air that was sweet and full of entomological strummings. But Otzi could find no delight in a sunset. Beauty strained her nerves. The loveliness of the evening twisted itself into the sensation of longing. But for what? For more. For more, or for some end to it, some climax. But the sweetness only stretched on, like a violin string that is tuned to unendurable tautness but will not snap. No release, only fading, light bleaching away. Out on the grass, Frances shouted something rude at Grayson, and Otzi thought of scolding him but could not be bothered. The Van Meter girl looked pleased with herself, there beside Sterling, even though he seemed to have gone off into one of his silences. Propellers droned overhead, one of those buzzy little twin-engine planes. Beyond, the almost full moon was ascending in time with the purpling of the sky. A string of birds sped by. Otzi could feel the world pivoting away from her, the unstoppable entropy. Was longing a pleasure in itself? She had been at a party once, not unlike this one, back when she was married and newly pregnant with her first child, and Freddie Mon, whom she had known since childhood, had grabbed her hand and kissed its palm as she passed him in the hall on her way to the bathroom. She remembered Freddie's dry lips and the tip of his tongue on her hand. He was 3 sheets to the wind and probably only meant to be playful, but for months afterward, until her pregnancy became too much of a distraction for Harold, she had pressed her hand to his mouth while they made love and told him to kiss it. His lips never produced the same effect as Freddie's, but she had persisted, irritably casting around for satisfaction. Her disappointment made her wish so fervently to be kissed again by Freddie Mon that her desire spilled over and made her cling tightly to Harold, who strutted around afterward like a rooster. And now she was an old woman, about to become a great-grandmother, sitting at a party on a summer evening and thinking about death. Grayson swatted the birdie over Dickie Jr.'s head into the grass and made sure Daphne had seen. Love was just one more thing that would make it difficult to die. When had she become so morbid, so resigned? She didn't know. The sun's daily arc might have tricked her into believing she was following an infinite circle, but she knew she was marching a straight line. What a party guest she was. What terrible vodka the Van Meters had. She closed her eyes and pressed her palm against her lips. Thank you.
So, this is a night of first novels, first time I've ever tried to read while wearing a baby. First time a National Book Award finalist has ever offered to carry my diaper bag. Keep your fingers crossed, people. So, my book is called Aleph the Unseen. It's about a young hacker living in an unnamed Middle Eastern emirate who runs afoul of the law and has to go on the run from a very shadowy state security apparatus, along with the girl next door, whose name is Dina, and a very suspicious, shady genie named Vikram the Vampire. And in the scene that I'll read tonight, they've taken refuge in this old, wonderful medieval mosque. And the sheikh there has sort of given them refuge, and they're under siege from the state security forces, who are literally trying to cut through the doors of the mosque to get to them. And in the midst of this chaos, the sheikh insists that they observe the dawn prayer. So that's the scene. Someone pounded on the great doors from the outside. Sheikh Bilal ignored the noise and cleared his throat. The call to prayer came melodiously up from his lips in a voice that suggested a much younger man, confident, well-trained, unwavering. For a moment, Aleph was distracted by the force of the familiar words, praising prayer above sleep. It was not singing exactly, but some occult scale, the music of the spheres. The pounding arose again. Aleph gritted his teeth, forcing himself not to look back. It was idiocy to stand there and do nothing, he thought, like the sheep that crowded the streets on the eve of the Feast of Sacrifice, wagging their little heads and making plans for the following week. In front of him, Sheikh Bilal was bowing. Aleph hurried to copy his movements. The commotion outside the great doors grew louder. Abruptly, the noise stopped, replaced by a terrified howl. The hair stood up on Aleph's neck. He knelt and touched his forehead to the musty carpet, fighting back the bile that rose in his throat. As he stood for the second rak'ah, the noise redoubled outside, punctuated by the sound of a police siren. Sheikh Bilal raised his voice. And on the elevated places shall stand men who know all things by their signs. They shall call out to the dwellers of the garden, peace be upon you. They shall not have entered it yet, though they hope. On his knees, Aleph greeted the angel to his right. When he turned to his left, he saw Vikram kneeling next to him. He yelped. Quiet, said Vikram. You sound like a little girl. Did you just kill someone outside? No. I thought the old man might be upset by guts on his doorstep. I gave them all a good scare, though. 1 or 2 are catatonic. How many are there? They've cordoned off the whole street. That should give you an idea. The other things, well, it's difficult to guess how many there are. They move as one. I'm not sure anybody besides the man who summoned them can see them. The people from State don't seem to realize they're there. Dina crept up from the back of the room and sat down several feet away from Aleph. If I go out there and tell them I've been held hostage by a terrorist, do you think they'll let me go home? She asked. Miserably, Aleph attempted to catch her eye. She ignored him. Since you deliberately misled a state agent in order to protect your abductor, I doubt it. Vikram cocked his head at her. How is your arm, little sister? I smell blood. It's fine. I'm fine. Aleph gave an inarticulate cry of frustration. Sit down. Sheikh Bilal's voice left no room for refusal. He carried a folding chair under one arm and a volume of tafsir under the other. Enough sniveling. You will all listen quietly to the lesson I prepared for the dars that would be taking place at this very moment had your escapades not prevented my students from attending. What? Why? Aleph looked from the sheikh to the great doors. The sound of groaning metal suggested State had moved from manpower to more forceful methods. This is crazy. They're cutting through the doors and you want us to sit here at your knee like a bunch of pimply madrasa students? We're done if we stay. We're done if we leave. At least this way you can tell them I gave you nothing but tea and religious instruction. My skin will be safe. The sheikh sat down on the folding chair, arranging his robe around him. Vikram loped across the carpet and scuttled up the far wall once more, disappearing out of a skylight. A pale, unsaturated luminescence, the false start of dawn, came down through the opening in his wake. Sheikh Bilal opened the tafsir to a marked page. We will begin with a question, he said. It is particularly appropriate to this context. God in his mercy tells us that a good deed is recorded as soon as the person decides to perform it, while a bad deed is only recorded after it has been performed. But the world today is more complicated than it once was. So I present you with the following dilemma, posed to me by a young boy of my congregation. When one is playing a video game and his avatar consumes a piece of digital pork, has a sin been committed? Aleph waited. You're asking me, he said when Sheikh Bilal was silent. You're the alim, how am I supposed to know? I'm interested in your opinion. I know very little about video games. It's my understanding that this boy is very involved in something called World of Battlecraft. Aleph sighed in exasperation. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The great doors shrieked as though under pressure from a saw. I really can't concentrate. It mattered very much to this young person. I was inclined to tell him that if he was worried, it probably was a sin, or at the very least, would weigh on him as one. For God also tells us that when you perform an action you believe to be a sin, it still counts as a sin even if it is proven to be permissible. Conscience. Conscience is the ultimate measure of a man. All right, it's a sin, moaned Aleph. I don't care. I don't play Battlecraft. It's for teenagers. I'm not looking for any particular answer. Don't feel you must agree. I want to know what you think. I think people need a break. It's not like they're out there selling bacon and booze. They want to pretend for a few hours a day that we don't live in this awful hole, getting squeezed by state on one side and pious airheads on the other, all while smiling our shit-eating grins so that the oil companies keep shoveling money into our pockets. Surely God wouldn't mind if people are pretending life is better, even if it involves fictional pork. Thank you.